Alright, so in this video, you're simultaneously going to learn good historical evidence for the resurrection, good evidence against the story of Muhammad flying on a winged horse, and a rebuttal to one of the most common atheist arguments against the resurrection and miracles in general. You're also going to learn other interesting things, like how one of the most predominant atheists of the 20th century said that the resurrection has the best evidence for any miracle in history. So if you've ever been online discussing with atheists or talking with them about miracles or historical evidence for the resurrection, one of the most common things they say is to point you to other miracles in other religion. For example, this meme talks about how Muslims also believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, and how this is similar to the idea of Jesus dying and resurrecting. But if we actually analyze the different components of these different miracles, we can analyze how similar they actually are in terms of the historical evidence we have for them. For example, this is pretty much the extent of what the Quran says about the night journey. To be honest, it doesn't say much. It doesn't even mention the barrage, or the winged animal, which many people refer to as a flying horse. It just says that he went on a journey by night, that he was shown some of the signs of Allah, and that he went to the furthest mosque. Not much detail besides that. If you want to know where Muslims are actually getting the story from that we're accustomed to today, they're getting it from here, Sahih al-Bukhari. This source actually comes hundreds of years after Muhammad died. But this is where Muslims are getting the story of the night journey. But if we want to look at what the earliest historical source for the night journey is, we're going to have to go a little bit earlier. So, even here though, this source still comes more than 100 years after Muhammad died, but it's the earliest detailed source we have about the night journey. And according to this, it says that the apostles', or that means Muhammad's, body remained where it was, but God removed his spirit by night. So what is it saying? It's saying that it was a dream, that he was asleep during the time. And this is even what Muhammad admits later in the same narrative. And so if we are going to compare this to the resurrection, we have the earliest sources of this talking about how it's still coming about more than 100 years later, saying it was a dream. Well, what about the resurrection? The resurrection has good historical evidence behind it, and here I'm going to show what some of that historical evidence is. But first, we're going to have to go to the earliest source we have on the resurrection. There's a creed in 1 Corinthians 15 dated to 1 to 3 years after Christ died, and here you can see all the historians who date it at that time. So this is the creed. The creed itself is in red, but the rest of the remaining parts are, Paul's writings. And so you can see that this creed says that Jesus died, that he was buried, and that he rose again. And so this means bodily resurrection. That's why it mentions burial and rising. So because it's mentioning bodily resurrection. It also mentions numerous witnesses, and at the end even has Paul establishing himself as a witness. After this, the disciples went to their deaths proclaiming this resurrection. And we know that this resurrection, the belief of the resurrection, took place very early from all those scholars. So, what can we do with this information? Well, even non-Christian scholars have gotten a certain amount of consensus on these different facts. For example, Gerd Luhrmann says it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. And Paula Fredrickson says, in their own terms, they saw the raised Jesus. That's what they said, and that's what all the historical evidence we have attest to their convictions that that's what they saw. All these are historical bedrocks, facts known past doubting about the earliest community after Jesus. And even Bart Ehrman maintains that it is a historical fact that Jesus' followers came to believe that he had been raised from the dead soon after his execution. We know some of these believers by name. One of them, the Apostle Paul, quite plainly claims to have seen Jesus alive after his death. And even, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, one of the most prominent atheist philosophers of the 20th century said that the evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It is outstandingly different in quality and quantity, I think, from the evidence offered for the occurrences of most other supposed miraculous events. And so what we have here is we have historians across the board saying that the disciples really did believe they saw Jesus. And we also have atheists, the most prominent atheist philosophers of the 20th century. He's actually converted to theism later in life, but he was one of the most prominent atheist philosophers of the 20th century, saying that the resurrection has more evidence than any other miracle in history. And I think that the best evidence we have attests to the resurrection happening, and the resurrection maintains as the best explanation for the historical facts. And I think in order to show that the resurrection is not plausible, you'd have to give me a good reason why naturalism is true. And so far, I do not believe that a good case has been made for that. So, what do we end up with? Well, for the conclusion, I'll say that the earliest sources we have that give us a detailed account of the night journey, or of Muhammad flying on a quote-unquote winged horse, was written more than 100 years after Muhammad died, and maintains that the event happened while Muhammad was sleeping. Only in later sources is this discussion of it being a dream taken away, and where this story that we are now accustomed to comes from. But for the resurrection, the earliest sources we have of that come 1 to 3 years after Jesus died, and maintains bodily resurrection as well as numerous witnesses. Even non-Christian scholars are convinced that the disciples really believed that they had seen the risen Jesus and were willing to go to their deaths because of it. Even one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century says that the resurrection has the best evidence for any miracle in any religion. Based on this, the resurrection at this point has the best explanation we have for these facts and is much more plausible than the story of the night journey. So if you enjoyed this video, you can check out the longer version of this video that will be in the description box. You can also, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a comment, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to this channel, as I'm trying to grow my subscriber. So I thank you for watching, and God bless.